This webinar series is brought to you by Wharton Human-AI Research Initiative. We are a center at Wharton that is focused on human-centered AI for business innovation. So our research explores design, impact, and governance of intelligent systems and their implications for business and society. And AI Horizons is our webinar series where we explore the kind of cutting edge work that many business and computer science scholars are doing. And we try and understand what it means for business practice, what it means for society and policy discussions as well. And in these discussions, we bring together many academics, not just from Wharton, but from around the world, leading academics who we have run into their research or they've come and presented some of their work at our conferences, and we try and bring some of the best and most interesting ideas to you through this series. So today's session is focused on AI and innovation, and in particular, how AI can support creativity and innovation, but also might it stifle innovation and reduce diversity of creative ideas. So joining me here for this discussion are three academics who are at the forefront of this kind of research. First, we have Léonard Boussioux, who is a professor at the University of Washington, and he's been studying the use of generative AI for product and startup innovation and idea innovations and things like that. And the second speaker we have here is Anil Doshi, who's a professor at the UCL, University College London School of Management. And along with Professor Oliver Hauser, who is a professor at the University of Exeter. And Anil and Oliver are frequent collaborators, and they've done some very interesting and very early research looking at how generative AI impacts creative work, and in particular, what it does to the quality of creative work, as well as the diversity of creative work and so on. So they've been very early and have also informed and inspired many other researchers in how they look at these issues. So first of all, Anil, Léonard, Oliver, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the webinar.
Thanks very much, Kartik.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Great. And one quick note to the attendees. We would, of course, love to keep this interactive. We're going to make sure the last 20 minutes or so is mostly dedicated to Q&A. So you can feel free to drop your questions in there, and I'll review it periodically, but certainly the last 20 minutes will be dedicated for that. And so definitely keep the conversation going through that. So to kick things off, just to set the stage, the motivation for this conversation is the rapid use of AI in many domains that have historically not just been performed by humans, but seen as something that inherently requires human creativity. Things like product design, product ideation, advertising, writing, and so on. And the business rationale for it is that it boosts productivity, enhances the quality of the work, and so on. But people have been asking recently whether AI can stifle creativity, and in particular, this question of whether it can even affect the diversity of ideas we generate and things like that. So where I want to start the discussion is perhaps creativity itself. Now, most of us intuitively understand what creativity is, or when we look at something, hey, this is a very creative idea or a creative artifact or things like that. But where I want to start this off is, how do we think about it more formally? What is creativity, and how can we look at something and say this is more creative or less creative than something else? Maybe to get that conversation started, I'll invite Oliver to jump in and kick off that conversation about creativity. What is it? Why does it matter?
Yeah, sure. So thanks again for having us. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for hosting what I hope will be an interesting conversation to everybody. So on the question of like what creativity is, I think it's one of those. First of all, I think it's something that lacks one clear definition, and that's actually quite important to say up front. Lots of fields across, whether it's psychology, economics, sociology, have different definitions of creativity. So there's not going to be one, but there's a lot of things that I think they have in common. And I'm sure we're going to talk about sort of the differences and the commonalities a bit more. I just want to highlight one thing you said early on, it's just really worth maybe repeating, is just how fundamental of a human behavior it really is. So when, a few years ago, Anil and I started working on this, and this was when ChatGPT had just been announced. It's sort of everybody's attention was grabbed. We were like, what could we be studying? There's many things we could be doing. And like immediately being both in a business school, we could have looked at innovation, which is sort of an important measure for businesses. But we were like, what's more fundamental than that? And so in my mind, like creativity is one of these fundamental behaviors, like productivity, creativity, maybe cooperation is up there. There's not many that are in all sorts of parts of life. Like, you can imagine from arts and culture all the way to innovation. Just having good ideas in the boardroom or with your teammates is really important. So when we looked at creativity then, starting to get into this research, we were fascinated that some or much of it is actually often defined what I would call subjectively. And that means that you and I might have a different idea of what creativity, what is creative, right? Like part of the problem with art sometimes is that we might disagree on like how valuable it is, because you might love it and I might think, well, that's not very creative. I've seen this before. I don't think it's, pushing the boundaries. And so psychologists in particular that we looked at have come up with two concepts that are quite important, especially in a business sense. And I know we're going to talk about these later, so I'll just introduce them early on. So one of them is novelty. Kind of like how rare is it? How is it different from many other things? And then the second concept is more like usefulness, but that's been called many different ways, like value and so forth. And usefulness, the best way I can describe it is like, some people have crazy, wild, and creative ideas that are totally useless. And so if you had them in your business, you probably wouldn't know what to do with it. You would all say the guy is really creative, but you might not know what to do with those ideas. So good ideas usually have a bit of both. But as we're going to hopefully discuss, the interesting thing comes about when we try to push people to do one or the other beyond the boundaries of what we already know, and something that beyond what is possible. So that's sort of one way we define creativity. There's another way, which I'll leave for later, because I think there's also a bit more of an objective way we should be looking at creativity. But most of what I think, creativity to most of it is subjective to the viewer and how they see it as creative or not.
Yeah, I mean, I usually come across novelty and usefulness as the two constructs most commonly used by researchers to try and do that. And of course, it's helpful to talk about these two, but then when you get into a specific context, it's again like, okay, what does it mean in, say, story writing? What is usefulness in story writing? Or what is
Yeah.
usefulness with paintings and things like that? But
Exactly. We struggled with that initially, to be honest, because, whenever you look at studies, they're often very specific to their context, as it should be, right? So when we started looking at writing, we had to adapt some of these. So just to give an example, one of the things that is often done is you don't just ask, a question of, so you might imagine one way you might measure this creativity is like, I draw a painting or I write something and I give it to someone else, a third party, to evaluate. So then you ask that third party some questions, and very often there's multiple questions you would ask, and then you would often aggregate it to an index. And so that's how we have done it. Like, how novel is it? How rare is it? That makes your novelty index, for instance. And then on a usefulness, we had to adjust some of those. Like, some of the questions were built for like, can you come up with like a paper cup and a piece of paper with something creative? That wasn't gonna, the usefulness question of that is not gonna apply to the usefulness question when it comes to creative writing, which is what we were looking at. So we were thinking more like, is this potentially one day publishable? Or, how much more would you have to do to make this really something that is a finished product in the end?
right. Yeah, I mean, I recollect once when we were chatting, Oliver, you had mentioned something like, okay, there's a lot of focus on productivity, which is important,
Yeah.
but creativity and in particular things like novelty are equally important as something you had identified. And, I'll pose this question to Anil and invite him to jump in as well. The topic of this discussion is how does AI impact diversity of ideas, or Oliver introduced the term novelty right now. How do you think of that concept? Especially when imagine in an organization, a team, a bunch of people are ideating a new product, each person is coming up with an idea, or a group is trying to collectively brainstorm an ad campaign for a client, and you come up with lots of different ideas. How do we think about diversity or novelty in that setting? What does it actually mean in that world?
Yeah, so I think this goes back a little bit to what Oliver was saying earlier, kind of in there's a multiple dimensions along which you would be thinking about creativity. So in addition to just kind of like this concept of novelty, is it new? Is it new compared to all the other ideas that are out there? We can think of, is it new? Is it new to me? Right? Did I do something that's new that I have never done before? Um, and I think that's called P creativity. They have these technical terms from psychology, and then you can think of, well, maybe that's not what you want to accomplish if you are at an organization, right? If you are pushing towards an innovation, you might need something that's new to the world. And that kind of creativity is H creativity. So novelty is, as Oliver said, it's context dependent. And the premise of the idea is that you're bringing something new, and the reasons why you might bring something new are going to depend on, the task you're trying to accomplish. So we care about novelty just because, right? We as a species, we as humans, we want to create new things. We want to push the boundaries of what we think of as never seen before. But then, you were alluding to an R&D team. Innovation and novelty and innovation means something that we can bring to market. And so there's a relationship between novelty and we're calling impact or value. So we wanted to have a market value, and that is going to relate to whether the novelty is going to be pertinent in that case. Or you can think about kind of just wanting novelty to see kind of like progress of humanity. We want to see new bounds and growth. So there's kind of everything from a micro scale up to the macro scale of thinking about novelty.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting and important. You said, we care about novelty just because as people, but in business and organizational setting, it's not something that's a side effect of the work we do, but it's like it feels like a core objective because, something like innovation, it requires surprise and more diverse novel ideas increase the chance of finding something that's a breakthrough idea. And also, society and people have very diverse preferences. And so we need to have diverse supply in order to make sure we cater to those diverse preferences. So we want a range of ideas coming out from companies creating products and artifacts that we consume. So it feels like it's not just a nice to have, but a core goal of organizational work in some sense. Leonard, would you like to jump in? I'd first of all ask if there's something else to add in terms of uh, what is the purpose or point of going after diversity, but I also want to pose to you this question of how do we think about it more concretely? Is there a way to measure it, to, even visualize it and things like that?
Absolutely. So I will share a few slides for everybody to visualize, in fact, what Oliver and Anil have told us. So the first question was how to measure the quality of ideas. And it turns out that we have this notion of value and usefulness that we have mentioned and novelty. So if you take many ideas, for instance, ideas of stories, ideas of new products, different images, we could ask different people, experts, for instance, or people from all over the place, to grade each idea according to these different metrics. And then you can have a plot. What we care about oftentimes, as we have mentioned, is those most creative ideas, the ones that are novel and useful, valuable at the same time, because those will bring something new on the table and hopefully will bring new things also in terms of financial value, environmental value, etc. So this is the quality. But if all these high quality ideas are exactly the same ones, then how do we cater to the whole world or different preferences, as you mentioned? So this is why we need to introduce this measure of diversity. And what I want to show you here is how we can leverage artificial intelligence, natural language processing, and a variety of computer science techniques to actually out of each idea, create what we can call a kind of summary. The technical word for this is an embedding. The idea is I can use an AI model to convert an idea into a compressed representation that will contain some important information about this idea that does not necessarily make sense to us humans, but to an AI model, I have this ability to convert each idea into a common space. What's nice with this common space is that we can compare each idea in the common space and see how similar or dissimilar they are, which means how close are they in this space. So out of all these embeddings, I can now plot my ideas according to different dimensions that I extracted. They're not necessarily interpretable to us humans, but to computers, it really allows me to see, is this idea looking like this other one? And oftentimes, when you ask many people to come up with ideas, or when you think about ideas, many of them are similar to each other in this space. For instance, if I ask you to generate an AI image, maybe we'll have lots of cat images or dog images, but very few people may generate some very rare animal. For instance, the aardvark, which is an animal that very few people know. So this is why you may have these outliers, these rare elements that are far away in this idea space. So the more spread you have in the idea space, the more diversity we have. So diversity could be akin to a variance in the idea space.
Yeah, that's super helpful, Leo. I think that's a good concept for the participants here to keep in mind as we talk about it. We generally tend to think about it as the spread or the variance of the creative outputs in some sort of idea space or a conceptual space that we're talking about. And we've talked about how diversity is sort of the raw material for future usefulness in some ways of ideas. The point being that you've got high variance of ideas. You also are likely to find that exceptional idea when there's high variance in those ideas, the ideas that are breakthrough in some way. And I want to now bring this conversation back to what we started with, which is what does AI do to novelty of ideas? Now, before we go there, maybe one thing that's worth stating, which our listeners, viewers, participants may be familiar with, but for those who aren't, at this point, there have been a dozen plus studies that have looked at AI use in various settings, from AI used by consultants to AI used by professional writers to call center operators, salespeople, software developers, and so on. And all of these studies consistently show when given a task, when people do the task with AI, without AI, productivity goes up a lot with AI. People get the task done, sometimes 40, 50% less time than before. Is what we're seeing. And in terms of quality, sometimes you see meaningful lifts, sometimes at least a similar quality level as before. But the question is, what does it do to diversity of ideas? And Anil and Oliver had what I consider as one of the earliest studies on this topic, looking at the diversity of ideas. I want to invite you both to share a little bit about your study, what you found, more generally about what it does to quality of stories, time taken, but most importantly, what it does to that variance of ideas as Leo just described it.
Yeah. Shall I start, Oliver?
Go for it. Yeah, sure.
Okay, so Kartik, I always appreciate hearing your compliments about our paper. So that's
I agree.
much appreciated. So what we did in our study, and as Oliver mentioned, this was a study that we performed, almost literally the day ChatGPT 3.5 came out. We were very excited about it. We triangulated on this idea, and our way of capturing this core notion of creativity was to have our subjects in our study write a story. Right, so imagine everyone had to write an 8-sentence story. Imagine it's about an adventure on another planet, and we have everyone write these 8-sentence stories. But what we did was we randomly assigned some of the writers to get a 3-sentence idea from generative AI, either one idea like that or up to 5 3-sentence ideas. And then what we did was we passed those stories on to a separate set of readers or evaluators, and we asked them to evaluate the novelty and the usefulness of the story on the dimensions that Oliver had mentioned earlier. And kind of the main line finding, one of the top line findings is along the lines of what Kartik just said, that when you got assistance from generative AI, the stories were evaluated as more creative in terms of both novelty and usefulness. And moreover, the boost in the assessed creativity was accrued to the people who were inherently the least creative in the sample. And so we found this kind of supercharge effect for those of us who were kind of inherently not so creative. So this first result got us pretty excited, but then we found a downside. I'll let Oliver take it from here.
Yeah, sure. That's actually good. So good that you're showing the slide. Thank you. I think it's really helpful. So just to say, when we started getting this first result, we're like, oh wow, AI is just gonna now really help us get more creative. Maybe we should just stop there. And this is sort of where I think a lot of people do stop, because it is very tempting to say, well, AI will have these benefits. And to some degree, I think we all probably on this panel agree there will be many benefits, but it's just as important to look at sometimes what could be unintended consequences. So when we had the results that Anil just talked about, you should sort of imagine that this was at the individual story level, right? We looked at each story, and these stories got read by lots of people and evaluated. And so we found that there was an increase. So you have a bit of an incentive to use AI because it's going to make you look more creative in the eyes of others. But then we also did a second analysis, and that's what Leo described in his slides, which was really nicely done with the embedding. Right, the embedding space is what we use. So we sent these stories into this embedding space, and you can imagine you basically get these dots on different dimensions. You can also just ask yourself, collapsing all of this information into similarity, like how close are these two vectors, so to speak, in this multidimensional space? How similar are these stories along the dimension of content, syntax, semantics, all of the things that make them possibly similar or dissimilar from each other? So then we can take that and we can plot it for each of the three conditions. And that's what you're seeing in front of you. So if you look at the black line, that's the line corresponding to people who were writing these stories without any AI help. Exactly, thank you. And then the blue one is the one where they had one generative AI idea, and the red one with up to 5 ideas. Now, what I want to draw your attention to is that in this top graph, you can see that the blue and the red distribution are shifted to the right. And if you look on the x-axis, it says similarity to the stories in the same condition. So what we did is we compared writers who didn't have access to AI with each other, like what stories did they produce? And we compared that to people who were writing with the help of AI, either 1 or 5 ideas. And those stories became more similar to each other. So in the words in the language that Leo introduced, the variance got smaller, actually. They were less rare. There were not as many novel, really different ideas out there. And if you ask yourself why that is, that's actually what you see in the bottom panel here. It's quite easy to explain. At the end of the day, people clicked a button and got an idea from ChatGPT, right? Like that gave them a starting point for an idea. And it looks like from the data underneath there, you can see they got anchored to this idea. So stories with AI seem to be shifted to the right. So, more similar to the AI idea that they started with. And that's maybe not a surprise. It's quite a human phenomenon, right? We get anchored to anything in life, really. It could be an idea that someone else gave you on the street. In this case, it was an idea that AI gave you. But now imagine, and this is sort of the second dimension we were looking at, imagine this at a societal level, that if everybody uses AI, we start potentially seeing people getting attached to these ideas and they start looking more similar to each other. And that creates this interesting and problematic tension that at the individual level, you might have an incentive to take up AI, because you will look more creative in the eyes of others, right? They will see what you've written and evaluate it a bit more creative. But then the downside was that we found in the study is it might make all of the outputs look a little bit more similar to each other. So I'll stop there with our study. You can probably take away the slide again. Thank you, Anil. But just to say, we thought both of these findings are really important, and we'd love to chat more about that and how it influences.
Yeah, I think that was when I saw that study, it really spoke to me in a few ways. Something that all of us have seen is things like how PowerPoint decks are all converging and everyone's deck looks similar these days. And, we're all using similar tools, so anchoring around similar designs. Social media content starts
Oh,
to
yeah.
converge. Everyone's got the same icons, the rocket ship, and the same
Exactly.
kind of style of writing social media posts. So we're starting to see that.
Cover letters.
Exactly. That's
Sorry,
the
cover
problem.
letters, LinkedIn posts, homework assignments, everything. So sorry,
Homework
Kartik.
assignments, yeah. We're seeing that certainly as professors, we see it all the time. The student homeworks are too similar. to each other. Now,
And
what's
that's actually maybe one thing to, well,
Yeah,
Kartik,
please.
just to say, that's the interesting thing as well, that I think if you look at one essay from one student at a time, you know, that's how they view it. They use ChatGPT thinking, well, they won't know that I've just a little bit at the edges used it. But once you have 100 students and you look at their essays, you're like, oh my God, everyone's using ChatGPT. You can tell, just like every HR manager can tell, that all of these new cover letters that, you know, the thousands of them they used to not receive kind of all look the same now.
Right. Absolutely. I think what's interesting is we're now talking about so many different domains, and we're extrapolating beyond your study of writing very, very short stories. So maybe, Leo, this is a great time for you to talk about your study, because your study is in such a different setting and space, and you're finding something similar. I'd love to have you walk us through that very quickly.
Absolutely. So on this slide, it's a quick summary of what we've done in our study. We basically did a very similar kind of question, which is, if we use AI, is it going to make us more creative? But we investigated that with a very different domain, which is circular economy. We asked 100 people, human solvers, to figure out a good problem and solution in the field of circular economy, which is the field of how do you give a second life to objects? How do you leverage any wasted resource? This is a challenging topic. And we created a crowdsourcing challenge, got a lot of data from humans, and this was before the ChatGPT era. So most human ideas were entirely human written. And we took this exact same challenge, and with a human AI collaboration between me and the I was able to also get hundreds of ideas. There was just one human involved with the power of this AI. What was very interesting is that the creativity of me as a human with AI was able to match the entire crowd. However, if we look into more detail, we also observe that what I was able to write with ChatGPT tended to be more valuable as rated by external evaluators. It means, in other words, that with the help of AI, the way I write can make it look good and great because AI has learned how to write in this given manner. However, the very important nuance is that the most novel ideas were coming from the human crowd, because AI tends to always leverage the same ideas because it's very good at recombining different notions, but not that good at going from 0 to 1. So if we look at those results in terms of a curve, if here we can see the distribution of ideas and the overall creativity. So the human crowd solutions, we can see it's roughly following a Gaussian curve with maybe some long tails. The human AI solution I was able to get were actually all better on average, but they're also all about as good. And very few of them are these exceptional, rare solutions on the side. And actually, we oftentimes care more about these exceptional, rare ideas, the ones that are very novel. And so the takeaway from us is very similar to what Anil and Oliver have said, which is you can get a higher quality with the help of AI, but what you create tends to be more similar to each other because we all use kind of same tool, the same techniques to prompt the AI. And because of this, it leads to a poor set of final ideas, although these ideas are well written.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Leo. Actually, this is a good time for me to introduce a couple of our studies as well, which have looked at, how much of this is AI generated ideas, how much of this is AI in evaluation and selection of ideas, and how does the manner in which we collaborate with AI matter at all, if it does. And so I'm going to very quickly share my screen. Just give me 1 second here. I seem to have lost suddenly the ability to share a specific application window. Sorry, 1 quick second. Okay, there I found it. So I wanted to share two studies. One we did recently with my PhD student, Ruben Salas, where we had people generate captions for New Yorker cartoons. So I think all of us are familiar with the New Yorker caption contest. Here's a cartoon, here's a bunch of captions people have generated. And so we asked participants in our study to generate those captions. and we have them collaborate in a few different ways. For some of them, they cannot use AI in generating the idea. For the others, roughly half of them, you can use AI while generating the idea. So you generate the idea, you prompt the AI, you get to obviously have a role, but AI helps support that. And then in the idea selection, again, some of them only humans can select the final caption and submit it. And in other groups, they can use AI support and say, here are a bunch of captions I generated, please rate them, give me feedback on why one is better than the other and things like that, right? So we had them do that. When you give them access to AI, people generate more ideas, even if the AI uses only in selection of the ideas. People generate more ideas because they know AI will help with selection. They spend a little more time generating the ideas. So the number of ideas go up. We also find the quality of the ideas go up when people have access to AI. But if you look at diversity now, the diversity is highest when humans are generating the idea. In the human AI group, which is humans generate the idea, AI helps in selection and rating the ideas, diversity tends to be high. But in the two groups where AI is used for ideation, the diversity goes down. And so clearly, one of the big issues here is that we're starting off with the AI ideas, and all of us are anchored there. One of the participants asked, how is this different from anchoring around ideas that a human team might also anchor around each other's ideas? The way I look at that is, our biological brains are all very different. So if we all do it independently, we come up with very different ideas. Now, of course, if we are all ideating collectively in a room and you have a team leader announce 2, 3 ideas to begin with, everyone anchors around that. And in fact, my colleague Carl Ulrich has shown that when people are ideating, it's good for people to go independently, ideate, and then come back and discuss as a group versus begin the discussions in the group, and especially have a leader or senior member of the team announce some early ideas to begin with, because everyone anchors. So here what is happening is 100 biological brains that are diverse come up with 100 unique ideas. You give them all an AI tool, everyone anchors around those ideas. The other study I want to very quickly mention, and then again invite Anil, Leo, and Oliver to jump in as well, is the question of what can we do about this? Is there something we can do about it? So we recently ran a study where we had, just like Oliver and Anil's study of story writing, but these were longer stories, 1,000-word stories written by people, but in 3 different collaboration modes. Human confirmation, where AI does all the work of writing, ideating, outlining, drafting, editing. Humans only get to prompt AI and select and make the final accept, reject decisions. Human creativity, where AI cannot be used for ideation and story outline. So the early work is done by humans, and AI comes in to do the more tedious work of drafting and editing. And Copilot, where humans and AI collaborate in all stages. And what we find is, first of all, in human confirmation, where human role is reduced to prompting and just selecting the AI output, satisfaction of the people is lowest relative to where they're ideating and outlining and then asking AI to do the work or co-piloting. And also, if you look at the diversity of ideas, this is similarity between any random pair of stories written by people in the same group, and this is the full distribution of the similarity scores. And you can see the similarity distribution is the similarity scores are lowest when humans are writing on their own without AI support, and it's the highest, meaning least diverse, when AI does all the work and humans are merely prompting. And a way to address that is collaboration design, which is to ask the humans to ideate, generate outlines, and then ask AI to do the more tedious work of drafting. And it at least mitigates that. So one of the things we've found in that study is that we can actually help address this huge anchoring bias around AI, and also reduce the diversity by designing the collaboration so that there's greater human role, especially during the early ideation phase.
Increasing the diversity?
Sorry, say that again.
Did you mean increasing the diversity, Kartik?
Increasing, sorry, yeah. Increasing the diversity by having humans play a greater role, especially during the early ideation phase. I want to also ask the group here what you think about things, mitigation actions, things you can do as a company to help avoid that.
Well,
So I've
one
seen a
thing,
few interesting. I've seen a few interesting questions in the chat exactly around this, and I can give a few examples. For in our study, it was one human with one AI, and definitely if you use different AI models, they all have different personalities, although they always tend to be quite similar because they use oftentimes similar training data. So different models, different prompting strategies. That's also something we investigate in that paper. For instance, you can ask the question in a different manner, asking for role playing. So prompt engineering can help. You can also leverage multi-agent systems to have an agent to create new ideas and another agent to criticize those ideas. And through multiple rounds of iterations, you can probably improve. And then better human AI collaboration frameworks. And I bet Anil and Oliver have something to say about this.
I didn't know if you were going to say something, Oliver.
No, I was going to say something slightly different, but if you want to respond to Leo, go ahead.
No, so I think that one of the aspects that I talk a lot about, especially with secondary school students, my children are in school right now, so I think a lot about what it means to have AI in the age of being in school and how they're coming up with their own ideas and building their own kind of character and learning how to learn. And kind of what I emphasize with them is to focus on exactly what Kartik referred to earlier, is thinking about using the AI as a complement to the work that they're doing, a complement to the development of their own thinking and their own ideas, rather than using it as a substitute. And so the idea there is kind of being creative is core to who we are. So having the AI substitute it for us anytime we're have an opportunity to be creative is taking reps away from our chance to build that muscle, build that kind of facility for ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. And I was going to say one thing that's quite important that I think just building on exactly what Anil said is like really cultivating that their strengths still, because it's very easy nowadays. And I think Kartik was going to refer to even the name that you gave the fourth condition Copilot, which is quite interesting because I mean obviously refers also to an actual LLM that's called Copilot, but it's also I think I don't know if that was intentional, but it's certainly the reason why I think it's really important to point that out is that there's a little bit of direction I see businesses go, that they do think it's good to have a co-pilot like AI everywhere. And I think that's sort of the danger I think we're running into. I think when it comes to creativity, we need some more structured interventions that really tell people when to use it and when not to use it. Certainly in lots of jobs, I think I would be careful not to use it, what Anil referred to as your core, right? If AI really does something that you do, that your job is all about, does that well, that's certainly a sign that it's highly exposed to AI, and you may have to think about like, what else am I doing in this job? That is sort of a human comparative advantage. But in many jobs, I think sometimes we're a bit like sort of driven to more productivity, and we need to be careful, I think, as organizations to think about like with any tool, like where do we want the tool to be doing the work, and where do we want the human to be the work? And I think that's going to become a leadership question. Like, where do leaders see human comparative advantage and make sure that people don't go to the co-pilot? Because if they do, if everyone starts doing this, one of the risks we're obviously running is that if every organization is like, oh, well, we can do it faster and we'll still be creative, then the risk is that they are not actually competitive, because all the other companies can do the same for basically no cost, or at least once you have LLMs, the cost is about constant then. And so in many ways, that's the risk, that you actually lose competitive advantage if you don't put in some rules of the game.
Yeah, that's a great thought. I guess there's a lot to explore there, but I do want to turn to some very interesting questions that are coming in the Q&A tab. So let's take some of these. Maybe very quickly, 30 seconds per person, how do you use AI? And maybe I'll ask quick questions over here. Any of you use AI for ideation of papers?
I do.
Not yet.
I've never, yeah. So
No,
Leo?
Leo.
I have many workflows for this. Like if I see a bunch of papers I appreciate, so I have a collection of all my favorite papers, and I can ask a tool called Deep Research. It's available in most leading large language models, and you can say, how would Léonard Boussioux, so I say my name, would tackle this problem in a very novel and creative manner. But because these tools are getting smarter and smarter, I leave these AI models to work for 10 to 20 minutes. And I also write very creative prompts about how I would think about this. I give a few bullet points to drive the AI into some directions, but I also ask for them all to think a lot. So this is the power of those reasoning models that are now very well used in general. So deep research plus my own critical thinking of thinking how I would do it with bullet points, leaving the AI to work and reading massive amount of reports that also create serendipity for me. And it's just like this really symbiosis between me and the AI over there. I'm definitely anchored, but I anchored AI first. So it's going the direction I wanted.
Leo, I'm noticing the diversity of your ideas, the research ideas have gone down recently.
Not true.
It's
Not
probably
true.
because
No, you don't have to respond.
I probably
I'm being
overtrained
facetious.
my AI.
Yeah. I'm guessing
So
all of
since-
us use it for some writing editing. I
of
do
course. So
for some, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Daniel. You
I
go
have a
first.
sorry. I quickly, I have a different research project where we actually give academics AI to help them with ideas in their own research. And what we find there that's I think the most interesting is the level of experience really drives whether or not the researcher is accepting of receiving the ideas from an AI. With the most experienced researchers really resisting the concept that you could be accepting, getting ideas from AI, really thinking that they are the drivers of new research, with the less experienced researchers actually being much more willing and accepting. So I think kind of something we touched upon earlier that is really important is, there's lots of differences in the types of people that are using the tools, and that's going to drive a lot of the value that individuals get out of them.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm going to quickly take a couple questions I see here with very brief answers. One is Arun posed this question about the recent HBR article that argues that AI-generated work slop is destroying productivity. And so he asked us our reaction of that. So the quick thing I want to say is that, yeah, this HBR article is getting a lot of coverage and on social media is trending a lot. But looking at that article, I actually find it very disappointing because they're asking people, hey, are you seeing AI work slop in your organization? That's a leading question. Once you ask, I'm going to say, yeah, I see it. That's not the same as actually measuring what are people actually doing and documenting what that is today and what that was like before. And so mostly what is happening is they're asking people, do you see this kind of stuff? It's a pretty interesting and clever idea, this idea that we have a lot of passable but unimpressive and unexciting work happening in organizations because people are using AI to get a lot of things done. It's an interesting idea, but to be honest, I just don't see any evidence for it. I'm going to ask Leo to take a question that Abdul has posed that is specifically for him. But before I do that, Leo, you can quickly read that question. I also want to take Chris's question about, are there significant differences based on how the user writes their prompt? Yes, indeed. My colleagues Ethan Mollick and Christian Turvish have a paper where they look at how prompting affects the diversity of ideas. And they find that vanilla prompts are more prone to this diversity problem. And if you use a chain of thought prompt, which is a prompt that is asking the AI model to come up with a set of steps and then first reason through the set of steps and then do the work, the diversity of ideas increases. I will drop a link to that paper of theirs right here. And I think each of us should drop a link to the papers that we presented in the chat as well. But meanwhile, I will also invite Leo to comment on the question that Abdul posed. And perhaps you can interpret the question first for all of us and then answer it.
Absolutely. So the question, thanks, Abdul, is about how we could have organizations making sure that we can still get rare breakthroughs, but having the consistency of AI, because AI knows how to write well. So what I can tell you is AI systems also get better and better. And there is a field called AI for science that has a huge traction right now. And many big tech companies are specifically building AI models for creativity and solving extremely hard problems. So for instance, DeepMind and OpenAI have managed to get a gold medal in the international mathematical Olympiads, which used to be something only reserved for humans. So what they've done is very sophisticated prompt engineering plus really good reasoning models and fine-tuning on specific problems in math. Those math problems are completely new. They're not in any training data. And these AI tools have managed to extrapolate from what they have learned. So there is a lot of ongoing debate about what is it exactly this reasoning from AI. And I can tell you that if you start having multiple AIs working together with proper prompt engineering, good flows, you get potentially even novelty, because those models can also look for tons of information online, bring it back into the process. But you need human ingenuity to build such systems in the first place. So the human expertise can go into the orchestration of these agents, into their design. And ultimately, you also need your critical thinking to evaluate the final outcome. So if AI gives you 10 super good ideas after all this huge amount of work, you as a human, your expertise will tell you where you think it's the most promising, because you have your intuition. You have all this learning that you have gone through the friction through all the tools that AI did not necessarily go through. So I would say it's really about learning this new mechanism and practicing it, and literally always constantly checking what AI can do, because it's the jagged frontier. It keeps evolving. That's a concept from one of the colleagues of Kartik, Ethan Molik, as well. Like he's worked a lot on this jagged frontier of AI.
Yeah, thanks, Leo. Julie had a question about prompts. I think we've addressed that, how better prompting can perhaps address this. Lorenzo has an interesting question. He says Socrates as well as Plato had similar concerns when written communication was introduced as a medium of idea propagation, as opposed to oral communication. Fast forward 2,400 years, and we're not asking, wait, wasn't this innovative idea already in a book? So how do you, I'm going to ask if any of you have a specific reaction to that. And if not, I'm going to cold call Oliver for this, if there are no volunteers. But how do you think about this question of people have been concerned with things like printing press and so on about new technologies, and specifically as it relates to it destroying creativity, for example?
No, totally. I think actually just in reaction to this one, I think it's a great example. And I think, shows that when you're in the moment of transition, you have worries that might not materialize to some extent. And in many ways, we don't know where the future will head, especially with AI, very fast evolving, definitely has taken leaps and bounds beyond what we thought even 10 years ago would be able to do. But I would say, even though this is a nice sort of quote sort of to show that it didn't happen, the truth is, a lot of times, the book and writing has shown us that ideas have come up in the same way, well, many times over history. So it's actually maybe documenting something that humans do quite a bit, right? And so I think one of the questions is AI going to supercharge that phenomenon? Just as an example, it came up earlier, I think, and this is just sort of extrapolating something that may not materialize, but imagine all the tech companies and the pharmaceuticals using these. I think it's great. And I think one of the questions asked about, like, is this going to advance some of our scientific findings? I hope so. But I also think that in some ways it will supercharge for those who are able to invest in these what they would have come up with maybe in the future, 5 or 10 years later. It doesn't, and that's the important point about this. And this is important for like finding the cure down the line for some disease. But if it's about competitive advantage, and that relating to how rare your idea is, how novel, that I'm not so sure about, right? Like you've just given everybody a tool that's very powerful, they can all use, and it just increases production of something that potentially would have found a little bit later. That's not to say that it doesn't increase welfare. It might hugely have. I mean, there were some papers recently that showed just how great this could be. But I'm just saying, like, if we talk about diversity of ideas, I do think that sometimes, these problems will reoccur. I don't think we're going to get rid of that, but it may be a cost we're willing to pay in some domains, but not in others.
Yeah, I guess we have only 9 minutes. I don't know that we can take all of the questions I'm seeing here, but just some quick reactions. Fanshu asked a question about, how do you think the problem of AI hallucinations affects creativity and the thinking process? One quick personal reaction to that is hallucinations arise in large language models because they're designed to be stochastic and probabilistically choosing from a set of options. And that process is what creates hallucinations. But it's also the reason why AI is creative. That's the reason why AI can write a great short story or a good essay for a college class and things like that. it's exactly because of that. So they are very closely related. It's what causes hallucinations, but it also allows AI to be creative. Two questions I want to take, which are big picture questions. One is about, this is a question from Ravi and Kai, which is, do you see the possibility of declining of our creative thinking ability in the long term as a species? And then aren't kids in school losing the thinking muscle? They're both related. I want to ask you all your reactions to that, but I'll share a quick plug for my colleague Hamsa Bastani, who had a study where she showed that if students use AI as a crutch, which is so easy, we do see evidence of that decrease in ability. And in fact, by the way, there are studies that have looked at doctors over a period of time, and we're seeing evidence that excessive use and reliance reduces that thinking muscle. And in fact, it's something, I used the term co-pilot previously. The FAA had advised airline co-pilots recently to reduce their use of co-pilot because they're observing now many pilots are losing that muscle to run the plane on their own because they've become over dependent on the co-pilot. So I call it mindful friction, which is the need to actually add some friction to your work so that you can keep that thinking muscle alive. I don't know if Anil, Oliver, Leo, anything to add to what I just said.
I mean, I think what you said is spot on and great way to think about it. I would just, I guess my response to Kai's question about this declining creativity in the long term, how it affects us as people, as humans. I guess my two responses to that are, for the vast majority of us, I can't draw for the life of me. I just cannot produce a piece of art. And, if I have an idea running around in my mind, like for a new board game or a video game, I can actually get pretty close to what looks like a working prototype just from my own idea. And so for me, it's hugely creative, hugely valuable. So I find that to be, for me, not at the frontier of artistic creativity, to be an extremely value creating tool for me. Now, I'm also optimistic for the folks who are actually at the frontier of creativity. Even if you just look at art before AI, art is a dialogue, art is a conversation. It's a conversation about what's happened in the past. It's a response to current events. And so I think we will see art that will respond to this advent of AI. And I think they will kind of highlight the absurdity of thinking that creativity can only be what's coming out of the AI or what's only being produced there. And so I think this is a dialogue. It's not a race to see who's going to win. And so I think along the lines of this kind of different people are different, we're all going to find our value from using these kinds of tools, I think.
Yeah, I think what you're saying also addresses part of what Aishwarya is asking in terms of should businesses use AI, or how do they figure out whether to use AI for which use case or not? And I think the analogy I'd share is that, Steve Jobs called computers the bicycle for the mind. I think of AI as the car for the mind. What a car does is it helps us go faster and further than we can. As Anil said, if I have a product idea, I can start ideating and iterating with the AI much faster and get somewhere, whereas previously I would have to be dependent on somebody else to do that piece. So it allows me to do a lot. But a car, if you're using the car everywhere and you're no longer walking, then it is going to cause serious health issues. So it's like that. It's the AI is the car for the mind, but if you use it as a substitute and you're using the AI car everywhere, then there is a problem with that. And Oliver also is kind of saying, do you need the co-pilot everywhere is the big question.
And Kartik, can I come in on one other thing that you mentioned about
Yeah,
the
please.
friction? Because I thought it was a really good way, the mindful friction. I think that's going to come down. There's going to be two versions of this. The one is on an individual level, like individual workers and leaders have to make that choice themselves. But I do worry about people who might not be, who might not realize the potentially cognitive decline that it could lead to, or potentially the loss of creativity long term, because it is a muscle. And for that, I sort of think we need a little bit more policy intervention eventually, right? Thinking of children, one of the questions was really about elementary and middle school. Like they are going to have more access to AI, but for them, learning is so essential the friction costs should be pretty high before they should just jump to ChatGPT and get an answer. Now, I think there's one option of that, which is that we hope schools will do it. And I actually think, having looked at the social media problems we have now, 10, 15 years later, where schools are not necessarily managing social media particularly well, I do worry that it's not going to be enough unless there's something done very, very consistently. And so I think with AI, the other option is that tech companies can take a bigger role. And I think they are starting to do that, like introducing a tutor role for AI. And I think that's a lot better, where the AI challenges you to think and to do some work yourself, introducing that friction. But I think we need a combination. We need the tech firms for some of that. And if you're in an organization, then you need to also introduce those frictions in cases you really want people to start and continue to think. Because the main worry I see is in 10, 15 years, now the people who've been trained without AI have learned to think. But who knows, if we don't teach the next generation to do some of that hard work, what it will be like in 20 years. I mean, that's the bad outcome. The good outcome is they will be supercharged with this AI because they can both think and use it responsibly.
I love this actually. Now I'm forcing my students to go in the streets and talk to customers and potential clients facing the problem. So in a way, we have to introduce more humanness and force the students to just talk with each other, peer evaluate, talk to the people who care about different problems, and do harder, more complicated things because AI can help them. And we reintroduce that friction because no AI is yet able to go in the world just asking these things. And I just love emphasizing that you as a human is as precious as ever, and even more. And those human contacts, this human touch, is really what makes life also so precious. So reintroducing the beauty, the joy of interacting with each other, I think is also helping students to realize, yes, there is a golden, beautiful world ahead of me.
Yeah, very interesting. We're sort of running out of time. I just wanted to respond to something Bakikan Aina asked, and very interesting paper on Reliance Drill that she shared, which I accidentally marked as answered. Apologies for that. We're going to take a look at that paper. I hadn't seen it before, but on a quick browse, it seems the idea is very similar to the mindful friction concept I was talking about, which is how do you add some friction? And in this instance, the friction in that paper is adding some distortions to AI output so that people are more alert about like, okay, let me make sure, and they're informed that there are some distortions added and they're more alert about the AI output and not becoming too passive. I think bottom line, one of the big messages is that we cannot become too passive when using AI. And even the teach mode or learn mode, I forget what ChatGPT calls it, the new mode they've introduced, which is the tutoring mode, is an interesting way to learn because it really tries not to give you the answer and prods you to think through the steps, the logic, and go through a more of a Socratic method of learning the concepts. And so when it comes to my kids using AI, I generally avoid them having to use AI. I tell them, if you have a question and it's not clear, come to me. And then I use the AI and I become the translator and explain the concept to them. But the teach mode is interesting because it makes them go through a Socratic process of, dialogues and so on to understand that.
I love that you brought it back to Socrates, by the way. Like we've had it twice now, which is a very nice way to bring 2,500 years ago to today's AI problems twice, which I think is really excellent.
Right, indeed. That's a great note on which to end it. The conversation is by no means over. I think there were many questions we couldn't take and tackle. I know for sure, note down all these comments. And in fact, the four of us are going to write a long form article on this. And we will share it with the participants when we've documented all of this. So thank you all for joining. We really appreciate it. Of course, we have future AI Horizons events, and you can feel free to join those, and you'll find that information on the website of Wharton Human-AI Research Initiative. And although we are out of time, some of that discussion can happen offline on LinkedIn or Twitter or email. It's very easy to find any of us on all of those platforms. Or drop those questions right here and we will compile all of them and make sure we address many of these in that article that we write. So thank you again for joining.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.